how do we master the road to greatness? It's actually a lot easier than we think if we just step back and take it step by step. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Logistics Life. And today I want to talk to you about something that I find pretty interesting. It's something I actually have just recently realized. And when I say that, this new style or perspective of it is what I've recently realized. So here's the thing. Not sure if all of you know, but over the last couple of weeks, I started doing more in-office work. So I've started traveling to an office, something I haven't done really since 2019. And in traveling to the office, this new facility, this new office that I go to at Pinnacle is about an hour and 5 to an hour and 15 minutes away. I live up in the country, so I take typical country roads. So it's not highway. It's country roads. So sometimes there's dodging and maneuvering and pivoting based on traffic. And when I first got in the car, day one, it was interesting because I use Waze, so I put Waze on, and I was fine. But by day two, what I started doing is getting back into, and if some of you have listened to me for a long time, I talk a lot about Automobile University, right? When we're in our car, what are we listening to? What are we doing to help us fuel the results we want, right? I was listening to music for quite a while in my car, and then I started to realize that my mindset was shifting. Just my attitude was shifting, and things weren't running as smooth in my life as I wanted. And it's kind of like getting a routine and the routine's working, and then stopping the routine and wondering why those things aren't working anymore. So I realized this pretty quickly and went back to my Automobile University. But with that came the frustration, if you will, of being distracted by the GPS always piping in and saying, turn here in 336 meters, you're going to turn left. And so what I've felt is through that process, I was missing the beat of what I was listening to. And I hope that makes sense. So, there's a flow. There's an energy that comes with listening to quality material, whether it's, a book by Jeb Blunt, or whether it's a podcast, your favorite motivational podcast, or your favorite business podcast, or your just even a favorite fictional podcast story, or a favorite story that just inspires you in any which way. So, and when you get interrupted, it kind of resets, and you almost take 2 or 3 paragraphs to kind of get back into that zone, if you will. And I started getting pretty frustrated with it because it was, and you're probably going to laugh at this because it seems to always be when it's at a really good part in the show or whatever you're listening to that the GPS comes on. You're like, and you rewind it, or, and then when you go to hear it again, it's like, after you turn, then the GPS kicks in and says, in 3.6 kilometers, or for all of you in the US, in 3.6 miles, you're going to turn left. So it's always telling you. So what I started doing is I said, well, what if I apply the way I learn to directions? And I started thinking about it. So what I've started doing over the past, I'm going to call it probably a week and a half, because the first couple of days I didn't really have this perspective. It only hit me kind of mid-drive. I started doing street by street. So in essence, when I leave my house, I know the first, so call it middle of last week, I knew the first couple of turns I had to do. So what I did is I would go about my day, almost on sub-programming in my subconscious mind. I knew where to turn. So I'd go about my day driving as if I knew exactly where I was going from A to B. And as soon as I got to the point where I was like, I'm really not sure where to turn, then I would turn my GPS on. So what was happening is every day I would get further and further and further away before I had the disruption. And I started really thinking about this, what if I really focused this process on everything I did? So, and then this was literally like the second day that I started doing it. So it was Wednesday last week. So it's been exactly a week and a half. And I'll tell you, by Friday of last week, and I didn't talk about this last week because I wanted to really digest it and solidify it in my head so I'd be able to explain it to you properly. By the end of last week, I completely revamped the way I learn. I completely revamped the way I drive. And when I mean, I'm not talking about, swerving in and out to get where I want to go faster. I don't do that. But anyways, just the process and how I take it. And, it was interesting because I feel like I've accelerated my learning about 20-fold. And I know that might sound crazy to some of you, but if you just take step by step, because I think what's happening today, right, is on our road to whatever our greatness is, whatever it is that we feel we want to achieve, whatever is that legacy, that destiny that we want to leave behind, those goals, that greatness, sometimes when we try to achieve it, we dive into a process that almost feels like we're drinking out of a water hose, right? Like we're out of a fire hydrant, like a fire hose, which obviously, as you can imagine, just picturing that, holding a fire hose, A, it's going to blow your mouth right off your face. And B, you don't quench your thirst. You probably drowned. And I think that's what a lot of us do. I know I was guilty for it because I would see something like, I want to learn that. And I would literally dive head, feet, and everything first in like this upside down cannonball format, all in. And what I found was at the end of it, I actually found it took me about 2 to 3 to 4 times longer to learn than this process of one road at a time. So for example, part of what I'm really focusing on and learning is all about automation. And I knew a lot about automation, but there's like a baseline level, and then there's a secondary, and then there's like this, quote unquote expert. So it's like baseline, amateur, experienced, expert, if you want, just to simplify it in 3 different tiers. And I think this is the way it is for all of us, for everything we do. You started to look at selling maybe a different niche, a different product. Maybe you've pivoted in the market, and you might be sitting there thinking, okay, well, now I got to relearn this entire market. But what if you stopped and just took one road at a time? So in essence, what I do is every day I pick a new destination point. So when I get to the destination point where I'm not really sure where to turn next, I pay really close attention to the next 2 to 3 turns, and that's it. After I get the next 2 to 3 turns, I turn off and I go back into listening to the GPS, dealing with the frustration. Then the next day I go out and I go to that 2 or 3 turns, and I'm like, okay, I got it. Now I move to the next 2 or 3 turns. And I challenge all of you to try this, because the velocity that you can learn at and the increase in just overall like brain functionality, and when I say that, I don't even know if that's the right word, but the overall understanding of this next road that you're taking to greatness, the next road that you're taking to your goals, becomes so clear, right? So one of the things I did when it came to automation is I started to really dive deep into like an API and webhook. And I'm not going to get technical for anyone that doesn't understand what that is. I understood the concepts of it. I've dealt with it many times. But what I'm doing is I'm doing this deep dive. So what I do is I start at step 1. And even if I know it, I refresh my step. So just like when I get in my vehicle to drive to the office now, I say, okay, I know I need to turn here, I know I need to turn here, and I know I need to turn here. Because knowing is half the battle, right? I've talked to you a lot about the G.I. Joe philosophy. I think one of the greatest philosophers on earth one of the greatest statements on earth is that statement. And the reason I say it is because if I know where I'm going, then I know where I can almost tune out, if that makes sense, and absorb the material I'm trying to learn. So for example, when it comes to learning a new strategy, learning a new flow, learning a new framework, right? These things are all critical to our overall growth and development. If we can framework out everything we do, we never get lost in the process. So my framework for driving is I go to the end, I do the 3 turns, and that's it. I don't try and do, oh, well, I know those those 3 turns were easy, so I'm going to do 6. Because what that's going to do, for me anyways, maybe you could do that, but for me in my framework, then I'm like, well, if I done 6, I may as well do 9. And then I lose track of the first 3, right? So it's really a systematic step-by-step process that creates that learning flow for me. So the question then becomes, and I'm very aware of this, I'm sure you guys are too. We don't all learn the same. You might be able to take 15 turns and memorize them all, and that's awesome. But my challenge to you is create that framework so it's going to stick, right? I'm sure you guys have all heard me talk quite a bit about, the fact that when we are trying to learn something or when we're introducing something new into our day, right? You'll notice over the last couple of weeks, I haven't been live every day. And the reason I haven't is because of the timing. I haven't been able to add this show into my new framework of getting to the office. So I'm coming up with ways to do it, because what the big challenge is for every one of us is we have a process we go through every day, right? We get used to that process. If we want to add something new to our life, it must fit within that process, or we must dramatically change our process and be dedicated to that change. And a lot of the times, it's not as simple as that. And I'm sure all of you can agree, right? If you say to yourself, okay, every day at 10 a.m. to 12, I'm going to close my door and I'm going to sell, right? You might get that done for a couple of days, but then all of a sudden you're going to have a fire you have to put out. And depending on if you have an ops team, if you don't, if you have a general ops team or non-general, or if it's your team, whatever the case may be, you're all going to have different layers that you're dealing with. But the first day that this challenge happens or a fire happens that you have to put out, you might miss that 10 to 12. And you've realized, oh, well, that doesn't work for me, right? Because it doesn't fit into that framework. So what you have to do is 2 things, right? You either sell when you can, so meaning you solve the problem, but then you be diligent at getting back on the phone and selling. Or you change the framework, meaning you train your team. You train your customers. You start doing things like putting out of office reminders on your email saying I'm out of the office from 10 to 12, that kind of thing. But you have to be dedicated to that change. And trust me, I'm very aware. Sometimes it's not as easy, hey, Dan, it's real easy for you to... No, it's not. Like, we all go through the same challenges. Just because I'm sitting here, speaking to you and live and all these things, does not mean I don't have any of the challenges you have. That's crazy. And I think we all get caught up in these stupid ass social posts where it's hunky-dory and rose-colored glasses and, oh, I'm so successful at this, I'm so successful at that. Like, we see all this bullshit everywhere. Everybody has challenges. Everybody has issues. It's what we do and how we framework out that road to greatness that's really going to be the nucleus of how we survive and how we win. Not just survive, thrive. And that's the real nucleus. That's the core aspect of all of this, is really mastering our road to greatness, not yours. I can't master your road to greatness. I can share with you how I'm getting to my greatness. I can share with you strategies, tactical information, deployment information, frameworks that I believe will catapult your results. But I'll tell you, I don't think there's one single mentor I've had. Well, probably 1 or 2 actually, where I've taken a framework that I've used, that they've used or they've shared with me or they taught me, and used it verbatim. Because I have to mold it to who I am, how I learn, what I do, how I do it. Probably one of the only 2, and the one that sticks out most in my head, is the 7 layers deep. And I've actually written up a summary for a podcast on this next week. So I won't get too deep into it because I want to get deep into it next week. But if you're here still, I'll share with you. So what the idea and the strategy is really to identify your why. Like, why do you do what you do? what's the big mission we're after? And what this is to go 7 layers deep. And I can tell you, when I learned this from Dean Graciosi and Tony Robbins inside the mastermind community, I was almost in tears at the end of it. And it's interesting because I gleaned that from them, and it's not stolen for all of you. It's something they said, you go out and take this to your community because this is powerful. And everyone I've put that through has pretty much shed tears. And it's a process in really distilling why we do what we do. And what is the big driving factor behind our mission, behind our goals, behind our desires. And when you do this exercise, it's crazy. But again, it's step by step by step. Each 7 layers is a different road to get you to your greatness, to the destination, to the goal of synthesizing your why and distilling it down to the big reason we do what we do. So when you look at that, and then you start looking at other layers and other frameworks that people use to teach, when you and this is something I've been paying attention to since this. I'm sure I'm not the first one to come up with it. I'm sure somebody else out there has spoken about it. Absolutely sure, because I don't think there's any original ideas. They're all a derivative from something else. I mean, you look at all the personal development, motivational books. A lot of them stemmed from the James Allen, from the Napoleon Hills of the world. Like, you know, from I mean, this is just what it is. This is this is like the foundation of what is today's personal and business and professional development. But when we like dissect all of that, it's a step-by-step process. And again, I'll go back to the beginning. I think where we all fall down, and myself included, I think everyone, is when we don't take it step by step. And trust me, I'm the all-in guy, right? Like, I think if you're going to do something, there's no half-assing it, right? It's like Yoda said, you do or you don't, there is no try, right? So to me, that's the way that's what I believe in my heart of hearts. That's the mission. That's the goal. That's the foundation of everything. But I think even myself, who's an avid learner, and I mean, every day I put 3 hours into learning. But I think I was doing it wrong for the way I learn. And you know, I'm sitting here at 47 years old, just learning to learn again. Because there's a process, and what I've done over the last week and a half, I feel I've leveled up, like I said at the beginning, 20-fold over what I've leveled up before. And it's mind-blowing, because sometimes over the last week I've sat back and said, how did I not see this years ago, right? How did I not see it? My gosh. And of course, we do what everyone did. All of a sudden it's like, all this time lost, and and how am I going to fit? And it's just... It's in my opinion, it's so silly to live in the past. I think if you live in the past, you're so missing out on opportunities for now and the future. But in the end, my friends, it is about mastering each turn, each road to greatness. So try this strategy out. Distill down. If you've got this thing you're trying to learn, if you got a process. I mean, look at, for example, some of you might have a hard time introducing yourself, right? So instead of worrying about how am I going to close, or I got to get better at closing, what if you were to open the conversation 100 times better than you are right now? And just start there. And maybe your mission for today is just, I'm going to master that piece today. And the conversations will go where they go, but I'm going to master that piece. Because I think especially in sales, and I'm sure all of you can relate to this, it's you get this new strategy, you get this new idea. Maybe you're watching this podcast and or listening to this podcast, either one, and you're saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to go do that, and I'm going to do it piece by piece. You know, I share often my stacking strategy, right? Where I have if I do this, will you do that? I've got my QC ESP formula. I've got my follow-up between follow-up. I've got all these strategies that I stack. But each of these strategies, and again, this is not something I consciously understood before now. Excuse me. I think I got it. Excuse me. I apologize. Well, you can tell there's no editing here, eh? So the piece that I now understand that I didn't really understand, and this is where I go back again to the beginning, so I apologize for jumping, but I really want to make this context stick for you, is like I've been doing this, I just didn't realize I was doing it. And when you don't realize you're doing it, you tend to stray off of that process. And so I realized that, okay, I would create this one strategy. QCESP was one of the first strategies I created because I said, well, how am I going to really master my introduction and the beginning phases of my sales? So it was QCSP, right? Qualifying question, clarifying question, expert story positioning. QCESP, expert story positioning. And then what I realized is when I get to that end of it and I start really digging deep into the conversation, I said, I got this gap I got to bridge. So that's where I created the, if I do this, will you do that gap? Bridge, right? Bridge gap, bridge builder, whatever you want to talk, bridger. And then, so I bridged that gap where now I've got the beginning and the middle of the conversation done. Now when it's, hey, if I get you this information by X time, will you have time to look at it by X time? Can we get on another call then? Right? That was the bridge I built. Right? So then what happened was now it's follow-up. And I realized I was lacking in staying in front of the customer for the follow-up. So what I did is I built the follow-up between follow-up framework and a process in which we stay in front of the customer even between calls with delivering massive value and really good ideas and strategies and processes and frameworks. So I stack these. Now, in just subconsciously, without even thinking about it, I walk through those processes on every call, every email. It's the same process. I just framework it out differently. I phrase it differently if I'm on the phone or it's an email or it's a DM or it's a video or whatever. But I walk through each piece. And so I like on a subconscious level, I understood that and I did it. But then when I'm trying to learn something new outside of my sales flow, I didn't pay attention to that process. I didn't pay attention to mastering my road to greatness. I just said, I want it all and I want it now. I want all of this information. So what I started doing is I started watching 6, 7, 8 videos on something. But one video would teach this piece, one video would teach this piece, one video would teach this piece. And it was interesting because you've probably been there. And I was like, oh man, I got this. And then I go to execute on it and I'm like, okay, hold on. What was this piece again? And what I found myself doing was I found myself going back to the training I just spent hours doing, and I'm right back at the beginning. And so now what I do is I go in, I learn the one piece, I master the one piece. So I learn the one piece, I watch, listen, read, whatever that learning piece is, and then I go and I execute. And I execute until I can almost close my eyes and do it. Then I know I'm ready for piece 2. And so this is the same process that I hope you adopt. And I hope this all makes sense because I'm really, really, really passionate about this to really help you understand that this is actually a conscious thing that we can do to massively scale our results. So I hope that helps, my friends. Go out there and really just piece by piece. My good friend Brian Byro often says, inch by inch, anything's a cinch. And I know he didn't come up with that saying, but it's something he shares with me all the time. And if we can really do that, I think we're going to level up and execute massively on our learning. And it's tough, right? Today's a day of instant stuff. We want stuff instantly. It's an instant society. We want to learn this instantly. Hey, is there any way I could just ask ChatGPT to do that for me and I don't have to learn it? But when you don't learn it and you can't execute on it without outside things allowing you, if you can't just take a piece of paper, no electronics, and execute on it, then you're not really learning it. It's a surface level learning and it will never get ingrained into you, right? So those are key aspects of what we're talking about mastering your road to greatness. Until next time, my friends, go out there, make every call educational and crush your sales. And we'll see you next week on The Logistics Life. Take care.